of issues, because that's a situation where a lot of people want to politicize economics, and economics is a science. It's generally referred to as the dismal science because you get answers you don't always want. But it is a science, and it's not perfected like a lot of science. It's still ongoing research and ongoing study. But it is something that if you do something a certain way, you're going to get a certain response, a certain answer, and you can do that over and over and over again, and you're still going to get the same answer. Uh, the problem with economics politically is that a lot of people want to do the same thing over and over and over again and get a different answer. So we're going to talk about some of those things and some of the things that just maybe aren't as intuitive. It's one of those opportunities to kind of discuss or look at some of these issues and say, okay, here's what's really going to happen. This may look like what's going to happen, but here's what's really going to happen from an economic standpoint. Now, I can take a political standpoint and say, I don't care what you say. This is what's really going to happen, and I'll be wrong. But it is a situation where people do that. They do it constantly. They don't always do it, in the same year, in the same sentence, but they do it constantly. We've had it happen historically forever and ever. That's why history repeats itself economically as well, because people make the same mistakes economically, and then they get the result that they didn't think they were going to get, but they get the same result. So it's interesting from an economic standpoint to look at history to see where we've tried things and what the outcome has been. And it's interesting also as a study of economics. Economics is, with an experiment, a lot of times in science, you've got, you may have a control group. You've got some things that you can test. You can test one specific portion, and you can carve out the rest. And that's the whole thing behind a lot of the scientific method, is to make sure you take out the variables so that that the results you're getting are the results that are as a result of your particular thing that you're testing, not some ancillary thing or something that maybe slips in. The difficulty with economics is that it is hard, first of all, to have a control group. Sometimes it's very difficult to do that, and then second of all, it's very hard sometimes to isolate the specific economic principle that you're trying to test, because other things happen in the interim that kind of can distract you, and that's where I think the biggest problem we have historically is that we get distracted and we don't really realize that we've been distracted. And so we think we've got a result or are getting a result that we want, and instead we don't. So anyway, that's kind of some of the things that I like to talk about on a Wednesday. And frankly, it's some of the things that, for me, it helps me a little bit think through some of these things. I deal in finance and economics on a daily basis. I'm a CPA. I do a lot of business planning. So I have to look at some of these things, maybe more so than some people do, because of the fact that I have a number of different types of clients in a number of different industries. And so therefore planning for them is, there's some global planning that you can do for all of your clients. And then there's some specific planning where, specific clients may be impacted by some of the things that are on the horizon more than other clients. So it's an opportunity for me to think through some of those. My name is Mark Brackbill. I should have said that at the beginning, but I know some probably have listened to the show on a regular basis, or our Monday show on Condo Solutions. But my name is Mark Brackbill. I'm a CPA. I've been practicing in my own firm for about 25 or 26 years, I think, something in that range. Actually, I think it's 27 now. But anyway, a little while, and handling, like I say, a lot of taxes, audits, accounting work, business planning, and tax strategies and asset protection things, a lot of those kind of things. And then Prior to that, though, I spent about 10 or 13 years, 10 to 13 years, somewhere in that range, in the banking industry, starting banks a large portion of that time. But as chief financial officer of a very, very large bank at one point early on in my career, and chief operating officer of another bank. So I was talking to a couple bankers the other day, just yesterday actually, and we were talking about. I was just saying that banking is. I love being a CPA, but banking is an interesting profession, especially when you get to the corporate level internally, and you're doing planning for banks. One of the things as the CFO, my job was to kind of budget for the bank and kind of position the bank financially to stay out of trouble based on interest rates and interest rate projections. And so every year at about this time, starting in about August or September, and ending up in about November or beginning of December, I was spending a lot of time coming up with economic forecasts of interest rates and volumes of business and things like that for the bank. And the bank was, it was 600 or 700 million. So it was a fairly large bank in those days. I was back in the 70s and early 80s. And so it was a fairly large bank. And so it was an interesting process. And the good thing, like I was saying to these bankers, is you're in the industry, you're kind of on the cutting edge. In fact, we used to refer to it a lot of times as the bleeding edge, because there's not a lot of history where you're going. So a lot of new products are out there, and a lot of times you're not 100% sure what that product is going to do for you, and is it going to change the result. There's where we're talking about the finance and the economics, is that again, uh, if you throw a variable into the equation, it's probably not going to change the answer in most cases, but it may, in the interim, change some of the interim answer. So, for example, back a few years ago during the Obama administration, when Larry Summers was head of the Treasury, uh, he walked a balancing act um, to try to avoid a depression. And so, as a result, uh, he ended up with the Great Recession, but but in the short run, he didn't end up with the Depression. Now, Larry Summers was a big fan of history, and so a lot of the things that he tried to do to walk that fine line was based on history and trying to correct history, try to learn from history. Unfortunately, and this is why I say economics, you can do the same thing over and over and over again, um, and want to get a different result. And you're not. And even though Larry Summers had ended up with the Great Recession, what happened in that process is that we didn't heal. We didn't correct our economy. You say, well, we didn't go into a depression, and so here we still are. But we aren't. We aren't. Our economy has had a problem ever since, and it had a problem before. But what Larry Summers didn't fix it. It actually did just the opposite. And here's why I'm saying that. And I know people out there saying, well, geez, nobody wants a depression. What the heck are you doing? Well, the thing with a capitalistic system is that it has to have those things. And if you go back to history, you'll find that we have had them on a regular basis. And they are painful, and they are indiscriminate, and they are, uh, and they're something that you don't want to go through more than once in a lifetime. But they have to happen in a capitalistic system. They have to happen because they have to clean out the inequities in businesses, the inequity in the markets. They have to fix it, and they have to bring it down to the core. And so what happened during Larry's time, and he's an extremely intelligent guy, and he wasn't doing anything that anybody else didn't want to do. Nobody likes pain. If you go to an economist and say, you want a depression or not? Pretty much most of the time you're going to get an or not. Now, the correct answer sometimes is, yeah, I do. But nobody wants to do that. And if you're a politician, you're never going to choose that. You're never going to choose depression. But here's the thing with a capitalistic system is that it has to correct itself. When it gets out of whack, the market has to correct itself, not somebody else, not somebody controlling the market, because that's the thing with free markets and with a capitalistic system, is that the market will dictate the outcome, even if that outcome is painful. And the weak competitors will go away because it's the weak competitors that generally are causing problems in the economy. In the Larry Summer days, we had a couple really, really weak competitors. We had the auto industry was out there. It was very weak at the time. It was trying to make a transition to a model that wasn't supported financially, and so it was struggling, and so Larry Summers and the Obama administration tried to pick the winners. So that's the thing with the capitalistic depression, is that the market picks the winners and it picks the losers. And unfortunately, during the Obama administration, the administration tried to pick the winners, and as a result, even though they won't admit it, they also picked the losers. And so they made the determination that this business will survive, this business will fail. You say, what are you talking about? That's, well, how about this statement? Too big to fail. When you make a statement that says too big to fail, that's a political, not an economic statement. Every business should fail if it's a weak competitor, if it is not going to strengthen the market. And when you save a weak competitor, like General Motors, look, I got nothing against an American company, but the fact of the matter is General Motors was done. They had produced nothing as far as any kind of new products that were, enticing to anybody. The stuff that they were producing was an electric vehicle that was the worst in the industry. There were much, much better competitors at the time, and it was the worst in the industry. But we saved it. And as a result, that part of our free market system, that part of our system, as it relates to clean energy in the auto industry, is not where it would be had General Motors been out of the market. Had General Motors been out of the market, somebody would have had an opportunity, probably somebody smaller that wasn't supported by the government, would have had an opportunity to come forward and create a competing product. Now, Tesla did. Would Tesla have been able to be as successful? They would have been probably more successful because they wouldn't have the competition of a weak product. Ford Motor Company is a good example of one that really got hurt. Ford Motor had done everything right. Now, I'm not saying I'm a Ford fan necessarily, but Ford had done everything right during that period of time. They had positioned themselves. They did not have a significant amount of debt that they were in trouble with. They were paying their debt. They weren't asking for a government handout. They were competitive. They had products that the market wanted and was buying at the time. And so what happened? Well, the government came in and subsidized their major competitor, gave them lots of money. So as a result, instead of General Motors going out of business, Ford then potentially becoming a little stronger and being able to compete with the Japanese and with the German competition and the overseas competition, they hurt Ford. General Motors was producing a product that was not competitive with anything internationally, and Ford now had to struggle to stay alive. So what we actually did is destroyed our industry at the expense of our manufacturers to benefit the Japanese and the Germans. because of what the situation was. And so that's what I'm talking about when I say the market needs to clean itself out. Now, the real too big to fail was the banking industry. And again, I was just talking about I was a banker, so I know what happens. So let's talk about banks and too big to fail. First of all, like I said, the cool thing about being in the banking industry is you're on the bleeding edge of everything. You're the first out there to deal with most issues, because if the bank itself isn't dealing with it, one of the bank's customers is dealing with it. And if you're doing business with that customer as a bank, loaning them money or depository accounts or whatever it is, but loaning them money, you need to know what they're faced with so you know what you're going to be faced with, because you're going to have their problem if you're not careful. So the banking industry is unique from the standpoint that it tends to deal with cutting edge economic issues and financial issues. So, but here's how banks make money. And this is the big secret. You can actually tell your banker, because many of them don't realize this. They have forgotten this. Banks make money by taking risk. And you say, well, yes, if you don't take risk in the banking industry, whether it's interest rate risk, whether it's credit risk, whether it's liquidity risk, if you do not take risk, you do not make money. There are many, many bankers that spend all of their time trying to figure out ways to not take risk. Now, I'm not talking about bankers trying to figure out how to evaluate risk and then get paid for it. No, I'm talking about there are bankers out there who say, we're not going to do that. I'm going to invest in treasury securities because I don't want the risk. I'm going to invest in this because I don't want the risk. And so they spend all of their time avoiding risk instead of evaluating risk. Well, that's what banks do. So if you take a banker and you say to a banker, here's the deal. Take all the money that you've got and frankly, banks don't have a lot of cash. They actually have a lot of securities, loans. That's all their assets, especially securities. But if you're a bank sitting around with a lot of money in your vault, you got a problem. You're not making any money. But let's say you go to your friendly banker and say, look, you're $1 billion bank. I want you to take $1 billion, go to Vegas, put it all on 00 and roll the dice. Well, I'm pretty sure that or spin the wheel, I should say. I'm pretty sure that you're probably going to get some pushback from that banker, because they're going to be doing some serious jail time, and it would be something that most bankers would never consider. But here's a different scenario. Go to your banker and tell them, go ahead and take your $1 billion worth of asset, go to Vegas and put it all on 00 and spin the wheel. And if you lose, I'll reimburse you. And you won't go to jail, and nothing bad will happen to you. In fact, if you hit, I'm going to give you a bonus and promote you. So not only am I not going to punish you if you're wrong, not only are you not going to go out of business if you're wrong, but if by some chance you hit 00, I'm going to give you a bunch of money. I'm going to reward you big time. So now that's a different story. As a banker, if my job is evaluating risk, what am I going to do? I'm going to take that risk, because there's a potential big payout and there's no downside. There's no downside at all. So for me, I'm on the plane. I'm heading to Vegas, right? Because why not? I don't go to jail. I might lose it, but I'm going to get reimbursed. It's not. If I do well, I'm going to get a big reward. Well, that's exactly what we did with the banking industry. When you tell an industry whose job is to evaluate risk that they no longer have the risk of failure because you're not going to shut them down, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to do everything they possibly can to make money, and they're going to take bigger risks. So instead of going and loaning to a local business that maybe, or to instead of loaning to a local business, which has some risk, right, but not a lot of reward, I'm going to take my money and make a big risk by loaning to Spain or loaning to, whoever, whatever foreign country. Turkey. How about that? That's a good one. A lot of them did that. Turkey and Spain were good ones. Um, that's what you told bankers to do, because they're players on the international market as well. When you told them they're too big to fail, they went out and found the biggest possible benefit that they could that looked legitimate, and they did it. And so as a result, they did not correct their behavior. And in fact, they became poor competitors because they took local money and they pushed it out internationally. They pushed it into the big cities, into the money centers, and they took it out of the local communities. And not only did we do that and protect those large banks, but at the same time, we penalized the small guys, because we said to them, you know what? You're not too big to fail. You absolutely can fail. And we don't care that you're the only bank loaning into your community, that you're the only, and we don't care that unfortunately during this period of time, you're going to have more risk and potentially have some problems because of the fact that you're localized. You can't take your money and move it somewhere else. You've got to use it in your community. If you're going to have loans, you're going to have loans in your community. So what did we do? Well, we caused those small banks to go out of business. The funny thing is, after it happened, the government then turns around and goes, "See, I told you so." And so the banks forced small banks out of business, and then turned around and told them it was their fault. Hilarious. Then at the same time, what else did they do? They told every bank that wasn't a money center bank, you need to get to be a money center bank, because those are the guys that are too big to fail. So if you want to have a job forever and make sure that you're not shut down, you need to go out there and get big quick. Ignore your local community, buy something someplace else, get into some other community, and get out there and get big. So what happened? Well, we took money out of a lot of the local communities. It went into other communities outside of our market area, bigger places. We started making loans in those areas because you had to have market share there if you were going to merge with a bigger bank to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Why do you think we have South states today instead of Gulfstream? Gulfstream was a great local bank, but let's face it, they can't compete. They couldn't compete in Little Stewart or the Treasure Coast with these big money center banks that were too big to fail. They just couldn't compete with that. It's interesting. Even today, if you need to borrow money and you went into one of your local banks and said, I need to borrow $100,000. I need to borrow $200,000. They're going to look at you and they're going to, well, if it's me, they're going to look at me and say, no way, I'm getting away from this guy. But let's assume that you're actually a good risk. But they're going to come in there and they're going to evaluate that. And it's a $100,000 loan, and they're going to evaluate it. And they're going to look what kind of collateral you might have. They're going to want a personal guarantee, and they're going to want all of those kind of things, because $100,000, if they lose $100,000, that's a big number for a smaller bank. And if they lose a lot of them, it is a bigger number that they're not going to want to deal with, because the government is going to come in and shut them down, right? Because they made bad loans. Now, to top it all off, they're making a $100,000 loan, and they're making a bunch of them in a market like Stewart. So there's no way for them to lay that money off in another market where they can diversify their exposure, their geographic exposure, because if they do, the banking regulators will come in and shut you down because you're not serving your community. And there's a Community Reinvestment Act that says that you have to serve that community. And if you're not serving that community the way the government thinks you should serve it, then they're going to shut you down. So as a local bank or as a small bank, and I'm talking, everything from $1 billion and under, $2 billion and under, or even more, you're a small bank. And so those $100,000 loans add up. But now let's go and take somebody like PNC, or let's take somebody like Wells Fargo, or let's take somebody like TD Bank, which is even Canadian. For them, their market area is huge. $100,000 loan for them is nothing. And furthermore, they're not making a bunch of them into one town. They're not going to make a gazillion loans into Stewart. And even if they did, it's a small loss for them. So what's the underwriting process for getting a loan at one of those banks? Well, it's very similar to what it was in the savings loan industry when all of the savings loans were going crazy back in the 80s. Remember the loan application process during the 80s at, say, Sunrise Savings Loan or some of those where you needed to borrow money? How did you do that then? Well, you drove up to the drive-up teller in the outside the bank, and you said, here's my $500,000 loan application," and then the teller threw money in your car, and then you drove off. That was it. That was the process. I mean, they were just giving you money. They didn't care whether you had collateral, and why? Because things were going crazy and nobody was really looking, and so as a result, they went out of business, and that was a good thing. It was a good thing they went out of business. Why? Because they were poor competitors. They were taking advantage of what was going on in the industry right then, and and as a result, they were making poor decisions. But they paid for that. Many of those bankers no longer are in banking. They don't do that anymore. Some of them went to jail, and so the market corrected itself because people took those risks and they paid for it. But what happened with the big banks, the Bank of Americas and those? They took those risks and didn't pay for it. So they're taking those risks and then some now. And 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 they don't have to pay for it. And at the same time, in some areas, they don't have to loan because they don't have to. They're not going to lose their branch in Stewart, and if they do, it's no big deal if they don't invest in our community. If they're not being held up from opening a branch or opening an office, or more likely opening a market in Spokane, because they closed the branch in East Stewart. That didn't happen. That isn't happening. But I can tell you this: if Seacoast tried to open a branch in Orlando, and they decided to close a branch that was here in East Stewart, I guarantee you they would not get that branch approved. I guarantee you it would have an impact on them. Why? Because they're not too big to fail. So that's where, so getting back to my little discussion about Larry Summers, the point is, when we step into a market and try to think that we can control the market, that we can manipulate it, that we can manage it, that we are smarter than the market, it never works out that way. Economically, that will never happen. The market always wins. It always wins. One way or another, it wins. It either wins through a depression, and trust me, had we had that depression in the Obama administration, and again, he could have blamed it on the previous administration because, obviously he didn't cause it. You can't cause something like that quickly. But it was a series of economic policies that had been put in place for years and years, including by a number of Republican administrations. There are many, many Republicans out there that do not subscribe to the thought that that business should fail. They do not want business to go out of business, and so they protect, again, big businesses that are monopolies. They allow them to continue to be monopolies, and as a result, they manipulate the market, and they take advantage of the consumer, and they charge the consumer a price that there's no way that they should be paying if there was competition. All of that happens, and it happens with Republican support, not just Democrat support. It happens with Republican support because they believe that, we got to protect the free market. Well, the first thing you got to do is determine whether it's free. And I think, and we've got some politicians today on both sides that are having a real hard time understanding the concept of freedom. And so we have a problem with that. So what happened was that we didn't get that depression. We didn't clean out those weak competitors and make us stronger. Adversity, Remember all the things your parents told you when you were a kid. Adversity makes you stronger, right? I got a shirt that I bought someplace. Says something like uh, smooth winds or something like that. Never made a good sailor, or something about if it's too easy, you're never going to be good at it, and that's true. When we're faced with adversity in our lives, it is not good, and many times we're just hoping to survive, right? But we come out of that smarter, better. So because it is a case that we evolve, we learn from our mistakes, and we get better. If we're protected from our mistakes when we were a kid, if you had somebody that protected you from your mistakes, you don't get better. You don't learn. You don't fail. In business, most people understand that a lot of business owners have failed way before they succeeded. The way you truly fail is never try. But when you try, you have to be prepared to fail. We have a concept today that's been, I think, perpetuated by my generation, and I'm in my 60s, perpetuated by my generation, that we need to protect our kids. And we spend all of our time protecting our kids. We don't want our kids to fail. We don't want our kids to have problems. We don't want them to have pain, suffering, or adversity. We don't want that. No parent I know does. Is my son or daughter better for that? No, probably not. Not if I protect them from the real world. Not if I keep it so that they never have that problem. And that's the same thing in the economic world, is if you don't experience that situation, that adversity, you will never learn from it. What we hope is that you can protect yourself long enough so that it doesn't end up in your death, the death of your business, the death of you personally. I remember when my kids went off to college, I had a talk with both of them when they left, and right before they left, and I told them, I said, look, up to this point, you've had problems, and you've had some things that have happened and different things that have taken place, and you've made mistakes. And up to this point, they were kids' mistakes. Now, as you were in high school, they got to be a little bit more serious mistakes, but I could still fix them. It wasn't beyond, it was still at a point where I could fix them. But what I told them is, you're going off to college now. Now you're going to make adult mistakes, and dad can't fix adult mistakes. You've got to deal with adult mistakes. And the first way you deal with it is realizing that those mistakes can cost you dearly and that nobody can fix them. And so that's the kind of thing that you have to learn from that. And that's the evaluation we make in business. And sometimes we make them wrong, and we make the adult mistakes and we go out of business. But if the government keeps that from happening, they're our parent and they keep that from happening, we will never learn. Now, the flip side of that is we really don't want the government causing it to happen. Their actions by supporting a competitor, for example, causing the small business to go out of business. Yeah, we don't want that either. That's not my fault. That's the government's fault. So the idea of laissez-faire, and keeping government out, there's a lot of sense to keeping the government's footprint in business as small as possible, but it needs to have one. They need to step in when there is no competition, when there is an oligopoly, a monopoly. They need to step in and make sure that market is regulated, because it is not a free market. It is not a capitalistic market. You can tell yourself all day long. You can say that, the pharmaceutical industry is a free market. It is not. And we didn't help it any by going in there and picking winners and giving them a bunch of money to create these vaccines without the risk of failure. Now, the government thought that was necessary to be able to stop people from dying from the pandemic. But again, I'm not talking about personal, but economically, anytime you get into the market, you create competition that is unfair. And when you do that, you get a bad result. So here's the question. Right now, because we supported Pfizer and we supported Moderna and we supported J&J, um, uh, did we cut out somebody who was coming up with a solution to the problem better, who would have come up with a solution to the problem that was better, that doesn't have the side effects, that's more dependable, that maybe wasn't a vaccine but a cure? Did we eliminate that person from the market? Probably. Absolutely. We did that because we pushed money into businesses that we decided they should win. When you do that, you do not get a good result economically. We did not get the best product we could get. There's no question in my mind. You do not get the best product you can get for the best price when you've picked the winner and eliminated the competition. So we shot ourselves in the foot. I understand all the rationale for that. I understand why we did it, and I understand that it was intended to be a good thing. I understand all of that. But I'm just telling you, economically, we're going to pay for the consequences of that. We're going to pay for it either in future illnesses that wouldn't have happened had the market been allowed to determine the competitor. So we're either going to pay for it in those kind of future illnesses, or we're going to pay for it in long-term effects, or we're going to pay for it in terms of higher products for other pharmaceuticals because we eliminated somebody who could have been a competitor in cancer drugs and other places, and instead we picked a winner. We picked 4 winners, actually, worldwide, if you don't count the Chinese one that didn't work. So we've picked 4 winners. Why? Oh, but we had to do that. The government had to do that. Just like the government has to provide $3 trillion. And they had to provide another 1.9 trillion. And they had to provide another 1 trillion. We had to do that. We had to do that because businesses would have failed. The economy would have collapsed. Well, what have we talked about economically? That sometimes has to happen. Is that a good thing? No. Is it painful? Dang right it's painful. Would it result in a readjustment of the market? Absolutely. And on the other side, those that came out, because a lot of them would not, those that came out would be stronger. Right now, those that are coming out are weaker because they came out subsidized. And frankly, as I talked about on the show last week and the week before, many, many small businesses have sold their business to the U.S. government without knowing it. They have EIDL loans that they're being given money and allowed to borrow money that is multiple times more than they could sell their business for. And they're paying it off over 30 years. I always think it's amazing. I'll be real happy to pay my loan off finally. Not because I want to pay it off. Actually, 3.75% interest for 30 years is cheapest money I'll ever get in this world. I think we'll never have those kind of interest rates again. So yeah, I mean, I'm not unhappy about that because I can probably do more things with that money. What I'm happy about, what I'm going to be really happy about when I make that last payment 30 years from now is that I'm still alive. I'm 66 this next month. I will be 96. If I'm there making that last payment, means I'm still in business, first of all, and I'm making that payment 30 years from now, I'm ecstatic. But it has nothing to do with my business or that loan. It has to do absolutely with the fact that I'm still alive. So that's what we're talking about. There's the kind of, what we're talking about is some of the things that are happening economically. And one of the things that I mentioned last week is that people don't choose communism. People don't choose, they don't choose the result of a communistic run government, a socialistic run government. Their economic decisions, whether they get involved in a market or don't, who they pick as winners and who they don't, how they participate and who they decide is going to win in a market and who isn't. Those decisions, those kind of economic decisions determine where we end up. And you can end up uh, many of those decisions, even if made for the right reason, uh, or what is perceived to be the right reason, is a bad decision, results in a bad result, because you can never plan the economy. One of the things that when you go to a communist country, you go to Cuba, you go to Russia, you go to China, they will tell you they don't have, they have, it's a country of the people. It's a country of the people, and it's not controlled by the government. Um, it's just controlled by some central planners who are a little bit smarter than all of the average person, and they can collectively decide what's best for everybody. So all they're really doing is creating your wishes. They're just trying to follow your wishes, but they're smarter than you, so they're going to do it better than you could do, because these collective minds will get together and come up with a better answer. That does not work. Never has, never will. Economies around the world have gone away because of that concept. No one is smarter than the market. The market, as much as we hate it, as much as it's painful, the market, if it's a free market, will dictate. Just like a country, if it's a free country, will end up as a better place to live. And it will end up as a better place, more humane, more conscious of people, their beliefs, their race, their creed, all of those things. Why? Because they will not have, they will have allowed people to experience the freedom of making decisions and the outcome of that. Um, I talk about one last thing, and it's kind of on the personal side that gets in there, is that, you know, I don't want anybody to be bullied. I hate bullying per se, but I don't like the answer to bullying that's become the answer here. The answer to bullying is to go find somebody who can take care of it for you. Go to the government, go to your teacher, go to your principal, and say, this bully's picking on me. They said mean things to me and they hurt my feelings, right? All right. Well, I'm going to tell you two things my dad told me, and they're worthwhile over and over and over again. Sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can never harm you. That's one I learned early on. So you can say whatever you want to me, but my dad told me taught me how to handle that, and it doesn't bother me. I might not like it sometimes. It hurts my feelings, but it isn't going to make me. It isn't going to make me do something stupid, because sticks and stones can only do a little bit of harm. But anyway, the other thing that he told me when I was about 8 years old, I came home and there was a kid in the neighborhood that was a lot bigger than me. I think he was probably 10 years old, and he was big. And so he had decided for some reason or another that I was the kid that he wanted to pick on. And so we were out. This is in the day when you went to your neighborhood school. So the kid was in school, but he could actively pick on me at home because he was in my neighborhood, right? Kid lived down the street. So I ran into him all the time. So finally, I remember it was a Saturday. My dad was home. And I came home crying because this kid had punched me. And so my dad said to me, so what do you want me to do? And I said, well, I want you to go down and I want you to punch him back or talk to him. I want you to tell him not to do that anymore. I want you to go down and talk to him and tell him not to do that anymore. My dad looked at me and said, that isn't going to work, because I'm not going to be there all the time to talk to him, and I'm not going to be there all the time to punch him in the nose. Frankly, if I punch him in the nose, I'll probably go to jail because I'm an adult. So I'm going to tell you what the answer is. The next time he punches you, I want you to punch him right in the nose. And I said, but he'll beat me up pretty good. And my dad said, yep, he will. But he said, the only way to deal with a bully is to fight back. You have to make yourself one that is not an easy target. And as soon as you punch back, he's going to move on and find somebody else. And you know what? That's how you handle a bully, no matter what. Politics, that's how you handle a bully. Business, that's how you handle a bully. If you try to go find somebody to solve your problem, you're not going to get it solved. You have to punch back. And that may cost you a lot. You may lose in that process. It may hurt. It'd be painful, break a nose, whatever. But at least you will have fought back, and that's what stops a bully. Ultimately, that's what gets them to go somewhere else. That's an answer nobody wants to hear today because, we don't fight anymore. We don't hit anybody. We don't strike anybody. And, both parties are guilty. Baloney. But unfortunately, I didn't tell them to go get a gun and shoot somebody. I just said, you got to punch back. And with any bully, regardless of what we're talking about, and you got to push back. And when it's the government that's the bully, you got to push back. And unless we economically start pushing back on the U.S. government right now, they think they're being our friend, but they're actually punching us in the nose. What they're doing is going to kill us, ultimately. It is not good for anybody. We are going to create and continue to save people who would have been better off being out of business or starting over or restarting into some other business, maybe leaving their job and going to work on their own, maybe coming up with their own idea, maybe developing the cure to coronavirus. Those people aren't there anymore. We made sure as a government that didn't happen. We picked the winners already. So understand that economically, you can do whatever you want politically, but those political things that you do, when you do them economically, are going to produce a result that you don't have any control over. And you're not going to get the result you think. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get the result you think. In the short run, maybe. In the short run, things look good from an economy standpoint because we pumped trillions of dollars into it. You know what? The economy would look really good right now if we'd have just given all that money directly to people. It's probably $1 million. Probably have $1 million a person. We'd be in great shape. And we'd all be good. But no, we wouldn't. Prices would go up. Anyway, we'll talk more about that next Wednesday. I might have a guest on here on WSTU Digital 1450. We are Martin County's Heritage Station.